welcome everybody. I will show you the history and our main purpose, why we like to work in timber, what it does for us, what the differences are, what we learned in the last 20 years, where we started and where we are now. It should be very, very clear that we never work alone. So instead of saying it for every single project, who the partners were, I wrote them here. It's, if I sometimes say I don't mean it, because it's always we. I never do anything alone. I will talk mainly about 4 projects that were sort of key to us. I will start with a little introduction, but it's a house, it's a school, it's a pavilion, and it's a monastery. So now, why we like timber, it's because of its, in the very first place, about its atmospheric qualities. This photograph I did myself, and a beautiful moment in California, and it was about space and the warmth, a certain informality, and that is exactly all I love about timber. But you see hardly any construction here on this dark photograph, but it says everything. It says what we want with that. Now it works a bit strange. These kind of spaces we always try to make. We work from the inside out, and we need a material that gives us intimacy and gives us warmth and gives us character. And that's how we first found timber. Sorry. This is one of a later projects we did when we experimented in a larger scale with CLT. Even larger space, and again with CLT, then the spans became larger, and we combined CLT with the lignature, with hollow core systems. Another space, a much later space, with CLT sheets. I talk about sheets, boxes, spaces, frames, that all these spatial elements we use for our work. I think probably you hear in these days a lot about why you should use timber, and why that is good for the environment, and why that is the only sensible material anyway, and why it's a renewable resource, and what it does for our CO2 footprint and all that. You will know that, and it's all very well understood and very much appreciated. But we always thought this is evidence. This is evidence we need, but we don't need that evidence to choose for timber, because we are interested in the way, what it does for us, and what it does for our spaces, and what it does for the people who use our spaces. This is the last project we have been working on with timber, the last large project, where you see very different kind of timber. But here, all the innovative materials, innovative techniques, solid timber, hollow core, and timber lining, and traditional ways of using timber, like for the floors and for the ceilings, come together. And that I will explain that to you. Material is a starting point for the form. I believe that very strongly, and we started thinking about this issue already back, like, you see that 1997, that was the first publication what I wrote about architecture. It was about Sigurd Leberens. Sigurd Leberens didn't use timber at all, but he was a master in using material as a starting point for the form. He used beams and vaults and tried to understand fully what it means to use a kind of material, and try to understand what the material can do and what it can't do. And then he developed his architecture from that starting point. This is one of his churches in 1963. He was an old man already by then, in his 80s. And this was his last building, a full concrete building. Here he experimented maybe for the very first time with the phenomenon of making architecture with sheet materials that are basically atectonic, not tectonic. And we found that utterly fascinating. So when we got our very first chance to build something, we did an homage to this particular building because we had discovered a building material or technology that was not yet known in the Netherlands. Nobody had used it. Somebody had heard about it, but we saw it in Austria. That was this wonderful new development, CLT, 20 years old, 2001, Rotterdam, cultural capital of Europe at the time. This building is a little timber homage. We tried to translate, to understand what Leverance did. We tried to translate his concrete architecture into timber and try to explore something, shapes and forms that would only work with this particular technology. We understood how these solid elements that you all know now, CLT, everybody knows CLT now, at the time nobody, but we had to find out how that actually works. We were thrilled by this discovery that you can make solid three-dimensional objects. They were completely stiff, and that could lead to a completely new kind of architecture that would get its stiffness, its stability from the way these sheets are put together. No structure and beams, no loose elements, but something that is as stable as a model you would make with gray card. It was this sensation. Also this sensation that this actually felt like model making in full scale. And those four men, we still know them even after 20 years. They were thrilled at the time together with us. The sheets, that was quite literal. We could put them on the floor and could see what was happening. And these sheets are also interesting because they were Kerto, not CLT. Kerto is a plywood, finished plywood. You can see the enormous sizes we could get. The Kerto was new on the Dutch market, and we got it for free, and that's why we did our cladding with the Kerto. And you see this quite complicated structure that was possible. This geometry was really only possible with this sheet material structure, stiff structure, and then as a result, the spatial quality was something very distinct, not tectonic, no rhythm, no modular dimensions, a free form, a free geometry, and sort of shell that where structure and space was one and the same thing. And that was exactly what we admired in the work of Leverance. It was a stiff little symbol, a temporary building, an experiment, an introduction of a building technology that everyone who's now using it has, of course, long forgotten. The whole area is completely developed, but we kept it, of course, in our brains, our hearts, and it has actually shaped us as architects. That it has become a very stiff thing that we profited from that. We could cut off the big staircase and ship it to its next temporary location. We learned from that. We learned to make spaces with sheet materials, and we use that for normal normal commissions for houses, not temporary ones, not experimental, for people who really would like to live in sort of timber shell. And we built this house. This house is maybe, the Parasite was the first CLT building, and the house maybe so far the last CLT house. It's beautiful, natural location, very sensitive one. And a very small scale location. And also here, this timber technology helped us to get it done, and to get it in a way that, that we could use the property of the timber technique, CLT, to make something that would fit in its location. The location is very small scale. You saw the image. So we had a very big program. We were asked to design a house that would house sleep 20 people. So we said we have to build a very small house that fits in its surroundings, and we can maybe make a big timber barn behind it, and then it would fit in its place better. So we designed actually one house that looks like two houses. A very simple little diagram how this house has been built. Indeed, a small house in front. It's as small as all the other houses as well. A larger one in the back, and an even and the third one, that is a little sauna. It really has been built with that. And again, a very similar photograph as 14 years, or 12 years before with the Parasite Las Palmas. The same carpenter, still one of the few specialists of the CLT. Now there are many, many more. The same guy we saw 12 years earlier. A big place where the whole assemblage of the CLT elements arrived. And a very interesting, in that case, also international collaboration. The CLT sheets that make our spaces, we conceive them, but the carpenter actually draws these kind of diagrams and really thinks in what kind of order he wants to assemble the whole thing. And then sections that were developed with the idea of spatial quality and that followed the properties of those materials. It's a very three-dimensionally conceived house, where you see that the quality of the finishes is much less rough than in the Parasite. At that time, we didn't know the difference between the different qualities of smoothness, you could order. And we knew that the timber would be overwhelming if we only would use timber. So we complemented that with built-in furniture and smooth floors without a material expression. A framed space where the absence of tectonics is used to shape the space. I think that's quite a special thing. That in CLT, you don't feel what is carried by what. It's just there. It's quite a pure space. And sometimes I find it also almost irritating that there is actually only a solid kind of mass. And we feel that we have to complement it with something that is more readable to make this particular quality of CLT, to make people feel that. So in this case, we added a veranda that has been constructed in oak in a very, very traditional manner with readable beams. You see them outside You give a certain rhythm, you know exactly, you see exactly what carries what. You have the column, you have the beams, you have the sub beams, you have the planks. You understand that the span is not very big and it's not very refined, but that is just how things work. And then the sensational properties of the CLT, start feeling them. We find that an interesting thing. We try to complement that. We try to communicate with our architecture how it's made. And if something is not evident and not so easy to understand, we add a little explanation. Of course, if you don't get the message, or you don't need to understand these kind of things. The clients don't need to understand it to appreciate the house, but we think it helps to appreciate the space. And like that, it's actually quite relaxed space where the clients can do with whatever they like, because timber is such a neutral and warm surface that accommodates many, many, many materials and many objects. An interesting piece is this angle. We had to cheat here a little bit because the two sheets of CLT would not be able to stay in that position just by itself. So we have had to invisibly give it a little help by a steel truss on top. It's not visible, you don't see that, you think that the timber does it all by itself, but in this case, we cheated a little bit, and I come back to that in the last project I will explain to you. Our architecture, we like to frame spaces. We like to be in relation with the outside. We like to frame beautiful, less beautiful views and give it this kind of a bit of dignity. And this framing is also showing the different kinds of timber used, traditional timber for the benches, innovative timber for the CLT, traditional window frames, and a traditional veranda. And that together gives you a very rich, layered image, even though it's very simple. Outside, we use timber in the most traditional and natural manner, also to become part of the landscape. There's painted timber for the window frames and untreated timber for the outdoors cladding. In this case, this is cedar. And then it happens what we intended, a house that is very, very large from the inside and very small. If you really pass by, you hardly notice it by cycling by, which most people do. You won't notice. This quote, I like to have that, and that is maybe the quote that describes most the ambitions of our practice. A sense of place and comfort. And timber helps. A sense of place and comfort was very important for the users of the second project I want to show you, School for Pupils with a Mental Handicap, also autism, where the atmospheric qualities of timber were very instrumental, not only the structural properties, but also the rhythm, the calm the rhythm will give us, and the acoustic properties in the way the timber accommodates daylight and reflects daylight. It's a building that is meant for its surrounding. There is a lot to tell about these surroundings. I could give also a whole lecture about that facade. I won't do that now. I want to go inside. It's a proud school meant for people who are usually not proud of themselves. That's why we put big name and artworks of the pupils on the facade. But that, of course, has nothing to do with timber. It's also a very simple plan, a very compact plan that had to do with the also with the mental disabilities of the pupils. They had to be extreme. It had to be extremely clear, where and compact. So a corridor, for instance, on the first floor had to be narrow, and you were only able to go from A to B on that corridor, and but still it had to be light and spacious and calm, and with very, very good acoustic. And the timber helped us with that. Here, the sheet material was not enough. Not only because we have larger spans, but we need scale and rhythm and readability for this much larger space. And in the combination with the daylight, that structures this space. So we, with using beams and, in this case, hollow core roof elements, we shape the architecture, and the beams help us to bring the daylight very, very far into the building. So if you see that, it is not only this photograph, but that is important to understand, that the beams are not only a rhythm in the structure, but also that they structure the light. That's maybe more interesting than the structural properties of it. Here you see four ways of using timber. Laminated beams, a very traditional building system. Hollow core elements that you probably know after your workshop. Lignatur in this case, perforated with for acoustic absorption. Then acoustic lining, not load bearing from lignotrend for a better acoustic absorption, and traditional lining to finish the edges in a proper way, and that's in this case ash wood. In these four elements plus the painted window frames, actually that's the fifth way of using timber. They together form this this composition. We do that in a very sort of conscious way. So that is something I would recommend very much to you. Timber, structural timber is usually soft timber. It just has this very specific orangey color that becomes orange during the course of time. Sometimes you can whitewash it a little bit or give it a UV protection, then it becomes less orange, but it has a very distinct color. And that is a very difficult combination with hardwoods. And we think that the only hardwood that really goes well together with softwood is ash. And if that is not possible for window frames, for instance, you would not use ash properly, you would use either different kinds of hardwoods or softwood, and then we paint them to bring to then the difference becomes large. But what we try to avoid is, for instance, the combination of oak and softwood. I hope I will show you later. The use of hollow core systems with acoustic properties we use also for the gym. In the gym, in this school for mental handicapped people, really required very, very good acoustics. And you see how the rhythm of the acoustic perforations also becomes an ornament, and it structures the space. So you have a lining, a low line of the plinth, then you have acoustic perforated walls. You have the rhythm of the roof beams. It's all very simple, but it is the structure, how the building is made, actually makes the architecture and gives you the spatial quality we desire. In this case, we had the problem that we needed acoustic perforations actually till the floor. That was advised. This kind of education requires also for a spoken word, certain kind of circumstances. But for these kind of pupils, the perforations were impossible. They would put their fingers in, they would hurt themselves, they would put chewing gum there, there would be all kinds of problems. So we had to invent something else. And then this particular perforation, this undulating pattern was developed, especially for this project, by the Swiss manufacturer of the Holocaust system. Then I go to the next beam project. This beam project is maybe a direct consequence of this experience of the rhythm, the idea of the rhythm and the beams and the tectonic properties that we discovered in the school building. We had to build a pavilion for Cornelis van Eesteren, a modernist urbanist, and it was an homage to the urbanist who designed the city extension of Amsterdam. It's completely a modernist development, quite monumental, quite large scale. And it has this, after 50 years of existence, it has this still very monumental 50s appearance. Very interesting. It's a protected monument now, the whole area. But those little trees that we saw in the last image have grown a lot. It's now a forest, almost a forest, but a very geometric forest. How to build there a pavilion as a homage to its urbanist. Van Eesteren himself has had reserved a little space in his urban plan for a potential pavilion that never was used. Instead, it was planted with Maidorn bushes with little shrubby trees, very, very dense. Here you see the same location, this little angle here, an angled pavilion that was a little building that would somehow end the axis on the river, on the lake, and somehow make the transition to the other geometry of the yacht harbor at the west. This is how the location looked when we started. It was just dark, dense, almost solid piece of vegetation. Not much quality actually, and a little bit scary especially in the night. But we felt that we had to make an homage not only to Van Eesteren himself, but really also to the place. So we wanted to fit in, to hardly be seen. So we made a dark thing, like the Maidorn bushes, like the little trees. And we just do something that would not overshout. It would fit in the trees. So if you, again, pass us by, you notice the building only when they're close by. The white modernism at the time has replaced by black modernism because the trees have grown and we are now part of the trees. but we refer to white modernism. This is, in my opinion, maybe the nicest modernist building ever built. And it's a celebration of tectonics. It's a celebration of what concrete can do. It's a celebration of light and rhythm and a combination of tectonics and nature. How wonderful is that? I hope you all know it. If not, have to see it once in your life and later, preferably soon. We found it very interesting that we had to make this pavilion as an homage to an architect who had been working in the time. Sverre Wien, this modernist Norwegian architect, has built this pavilion in 1958. But the nice thing is that this was Sverre Wien's second pavilion already, and the first one was a very similar one, but that was much less known, and that was built in timber. So this, when I discovered this image, my timber heart rejoiced. Really, I was so happy with this found that a building that was probably almost as strong as the concrete version in Venice was once built in a temporary version in Brussels for the World Expo, and that felt to me utterly modern, but also the modern for in the sense of 1958, modernist, but also would translate tectonics ideas of the Venice pavilion into a language that we would understand today even better than the concrete. And it would also fit in our ideas about sustainability for now. So we thought that we could use this transition, this Stoffwechsel between this transition of concrete and timber. Because in Amsterdam, and I think in most of the Netherlands, modernism is a style that is not embraced. It's regarded as cold and too rational. People would not necessarily choose to live in a modernist building, and they would miss something. But we think it's not the style, it's just the material. And with this, our own innovative building technology that we have now, our own new timber technology, we can actually build modernist buildings and still be warm and contemporary. We also found this one, also an interesting reference. It's all by the same Norwegian architect, and there we went. So we made a very, 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 very simple plan for Amsterdam, a low bay and a high bay, and they together would it's so neutral that we can make an exhibition pavilion. It's quite simple, but the simple geometry gives a lot of space for the timber to literally shine. Here you see what we did. We have large laminated beams and cross beams, and in between we have hollow core elements. Here you see them in section. You see the little chambers. You know the system, and you know also that this material is one is able to perforate them. In this case, that is not lignatur with round holes, but it's lignotrend with slots. That's the difference. You see it in the texture here. So this timber building is from inside. It appears much larger than it looks from the outside. It's a celebration of timber. It is a celebration of new technology, like Van Eesteren would do. Like we use what is at hand at this very moment, but we do it in a sustainable and contemporary way. And like that, we can celebrate this architect and but also built on his legacy as being someone who is innovative, always has been innovative. He embraced prefabrication. He wanted to give light and space to everyone. He wanted to make affordable housing. He wanted to make a really, truly contemporary piece of the city, and that we had to celebrate, and timber helped us. Timber was also symbolic in that. And then you leave it, you have experienced timber, and then you are again part of the modest surroundings and the trees, and that is what this place is about. And then this is a piece of continuous architecture, continuity where timber plays a key role to achieve this. And here from outside in looking makes these people to understand their surroundings. And that was what this was all about. I want to end with one more project. I have many images of that project, but it's going rather quick. And here, all we learned about sheets, panels, slabs, boxes, solid timber, innovative timber, COT, hollow core, cladding, and traditional structures come together. And that's why I dare to place it, even though it's not only about timber. It's also about that. It's about that we use existing buildings. We have so many of them, and if we deal with them in a good way, the scars will always make the building more beautiful. And the longer it lasts, the more beautiful it gets. So I love this reference to kintsugi. And I love the homage to this man who taught us methods to how to deal with monumental buildings, with existing buildings. It's also one of those heroes like Sverre Fehn, built in a man of this similar generation, and they belong to a sub-canon, but that's my canon. I told you already about Leverance and about Sverre Fehn as a timberman, but also as brick man. And Delgas has built very little with timber, also quite interesting, but he shows us how to deal with existing buildings. He has developed his language on this particular very monumental museum in Munich that was heavily bombed in the Second World War. And there was a big crater in that building, and it was almost irreparable. And he took the initiative to rebuild it, but he initiated to rebuild it in a way that it would stay a monument for the Second World War and the guilt of the place. But also he showed us what tectonic and the use of material would do to this kind of architecture, whereas the original building was not about that. The original building was about ornamentation. Even though this is not necessarily about timber directly, we can learn a lot of that. We think material is the starting point of the form of the telling character of a project. He repaired the scar with brick and leaving the bare brick unfinished. He made this renovation monumental. On the other side, it's even more speaking. And it's even more speaking if you look at it from a little closer. And here's the first sort of linked timber that you see. The formwork of the concrete, so that is ornament. It replaces ornament. And from far, you hardly see the difference. the closer you come, the more speaking there are. We had this building. It was also a ruin, not as spectacular as the Delgas ruin. This is beautiful painting from the 17th century. It's a photograph of the monastery in the First World War. And that is the monastery, how we found it 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago. By the time it had already been vacant for 40 years, left to rain to bats, to insects, fungi, to time. It's quite extraordinary that something standing there in a small city in the middle of Europe for almost 50 years empty. This is a very recent photograph. That's after the renovation of the church. They're still working on the church. Why do I show it? I show it because in this project we could bring all our timber experiments together. Here you see, without the need to understand it all fully. It has a very, very interesting history, this building, with many, many alterations and many, many additions that were all, again, demolished. And then this is how we found it, but all the scars have left their traces. We saw it like that. And because it is a timber structure, basically, what you see is a very, very bad roof. Has an enormous impact in the interior. Yes, we still don't see any timber, but it is in there. Wait and see. On the ground floor, there is no timber. Vaulted ceilings, all brick, in a relatively good shape in some places and very bad shape in other places. On the first floor, you see already that it is a timber building, and that the timber still is okay, but everything else is decayed in a very, very extreme manner. And then we come to the attic, where you see that the timber is actually the most, not only sustainable, but also most durable material, because that stood completely upright, proud. It's a very fantastic attic. We knew how to build with traditional means, but in a almost a very grand manner. Hardly use this attic, but this is I found that very, very fascinating. We don't build these enormous roofs anymore, and I fell really instantly in love with this attic as being a timber architect. So we in the competition, we actually decided to put the main library on there. That's the church. They are renovating that at the moment. Concentric plan. You see the walls and the inner walls and the outer walls, all there are load bearing, and that has to do with technology, with small walls and the span of timber beams. A section that still from the competition, where we say that the red spaces are the large spaces that are very public. The small, little brown spaces are intimate, introvert. There are the quiet reading spaces, and then, of course, the large green attic. That is something that is traditional, houses all the books. It's the most important space. And the good thing is that this whole diagram can be translated also to an installation diagram, that the timber attic that sits on top can be insulated also after a renovation and achieve passive house standards, where the stone parts are much more difficult to handle. We had to be very careful physically, so we hardly were able to insulate at all. I go with you to the building and start with this public zone on the ground floor, including the church. Again, the plan, where you see later on, you see better how the plan changes from a stone plan to a timber plan, and that's why I put those plan drawings in the presentation. And you see it here. The yellow ones are the structures who have been taken away, and but all the dimensions have really to do with the spans, the possibilities of the time, and that is directly linked with the possibility to build at the time in timber. The spectrum of new materials to bring in, we have solids, laminated, CLT-like structures of 3-layer plates, and the non-load-bearing ones that are the panels that guarantee good acoustics, and all kinds of other things and colors that are not so interesting in this presentation. But here, this also competition section shows up. You have these beautiful big attics, solid timber, and then the stone building in between, underneath, and the stone buildings, the stone walls have been lined with ventilated panelings. So the paneling was a tool to integrate installation, to integrate warmth, comfort, acoustic and thermal comfort. In these benches, we could use our entire experience we have with the timber. And here you see this beautiful product, Lignotrend, that derives directly from the load-bearing systems, but it's much smaller, very elegant, and very easy to use, and that exists in all kinds of timber species. An oak bench with the oak paneling gives a beautiful acoustic, also in these hard spaces. Again, you see the integration of techniques, and you see that is very serves the space, but also serves the atmospheric quality of the space. Different wings, different building faces, slightly different vaulting, but the use of timber binds them all together. So we use the timber as the sort of the red line that combines all the floors of the building, all the characters, all the different wings, and all the stages of decay that you see here. In this wing, there's hardly any plaster left. In other wings, we found this kind of heritage that we found fascinating. Of course, it's not regarded usually as being valuable, but we thought it was so stunning that we also left that. And that the timber lining we brought in was subordinate. And we even colored it, partly, also that's Lignotrend, in this case, a softwood, with this non-load-bearing acoustic paneling that helps us very much to control this space. Former gym that was blackened due to fire and decay, had to hide the installations. Also, that's what you do as an architect. And then you use your repertoire of timber to conceal the techniques. So here we have again Lignotrend, but then in a sort of washy blue color. And that has to do with the fire regulation in Belgium, that in these larger spaces we can only use softwood because hardwood would become so hot that an oak paneling in this space was not allowed. We can talk about it a little later. There are quite specific properties of the timber. We have softwood paneling and oak doors here. Here again, an oak panel to cover it up, softwood in a color, and then the wall that have been preserved in its very interesting blue stage. Also, these kind of collages we enjoy a lot, and the timber, of course, helps. Restaurant is another example of this kind of restoration, where the furniture and the lining of the outer walls actually gives a very solid framework for whatever the restaurant keeper wants to put in. In this case, we are quite pleased with his choice of loose furniture. Again, the carpenters were extremely good. They could almost paint with the material, we thought. Now we go one floor up to this little floor, that is the most intimate floor. And here you see already how the drawing becomes much more delicate. And that is because the attic has a timber ceiling, even though initially we didn't see it. There's a vaulted ceiling only here, and timber ceilings in all the rest. But the time has almost eaten the traditional structure, not necessarily timber. And we found under the false ceilings, we found a wonderful composition of decayed and well-kept beams, all oak, that were already temporarily supported. And then for the restoration, we almost had to dismantle the entire building, and you see, and then the timber had survived 400, 500 years, which was remarkable. All the rest was much lesser shape. So the heads, the walls had been moist. So the heads of the timber of the beams had been moistured and soaked with the moisture, which was very dangerous. We had to replace all the heads of the structure. An interesting process, but still the atmosphere was still kept. So it's that was when it was still empty. So you see many repaired heads, many repairs, but still the timber ceiling was wonderful. And then later it was they started to use it. And timber makes the atmosphere, makes the light, makes the acoustic, makes also the sound insulation between attic and this first floor. Here, the room in the corner with these monumental beams, some smaller beams, innovative insulation panels all together. Again, a few atmospheric images before we go up to the attic, which is actually the most important thing. Still, the monastery library of the monks, vaulted, had suffered a lot from decay, from moisture. 50 years ago, it still looked like this. We restored it very carefully, but didn't reconstruct any ornamentation. And then the timber furniture accommodated also ventilation pipes. You see that on the bottom. It's all in there, and acoustic on the wall. Also, that gives us little thermal comfort. And now it has been accepted as almost a public living room to study there. The last floor, also the last project I show you, is this attic. See, again, the plan, very, very delicate. It becomes thinner and thinner and thinner if you compare it to the lower plans. And that's because of the timber. We introduced mezzanine, and I just show you the images. This is what we found. And if you see the broken down, the rundown monuments, this is remarkable how well it was kept. So timber structures can last for a long, long time. For the competition, we built extensive models to understand that well. We developed ideas that were almost like that, were executed, how to preserve this attic where nobody can calculate that anymore. We have to repair things, we have to insulate, we have to put more light in. So we invented a steel structure on top that would help us to make a hybrid structure that would allow us to preserve the entire interior attic. This hybrid structure, the supporting structure was steel, so these two work wonderfully together. To understand what we wanted to do, we studied this. This is the in-between wall with the little steel columns, but then you see this monumental timber structure. And that is how it has become. So we hardly see that something has happened, but there's a lot on top of that. The steel structure keeps the timber alive. The steel structure supports the new dormer windows that again supports a smoke exhaustion system, new daylight, makes it possible that we use this attic. But then you see that we have also supporting steel beams in the floor, and they carry the lignature floors. There's a solid timber floor between the first floor we saw and the attic. So that's how this whole experience with earlier and innovative system really arrives in this very atypical restoration projects. You see here solid lignature elements. They're not hollow because of the weight and because of the role of this as not only as a load-bearing floor, but also as a fire separation. That makes me particularly happy that we now are able even to use solid timber to separate for the fire police for 19 minutes the attic from the first floor. Small, and just an idea about this quite spectacular structure that nobody sees now anymore. And then it was hidden and it was forgotten, but we know that it's there. The invisible steel structure that made the building a little bit higher than it is now, but that is almost not to be noticed. That went a little bit fast, sorry, but I noticed that it is an attic that almost looks like it was, a lot lighter, very well insulated, and fire protected, fire safe. We used again a similar lining as we used in the school. You see that? We used the timber, also oak to make furniture, lots of furniture. We concealed the ventilation pipes like in the benches downstairs with this reading tribune. Wherever you see those kind of benches, it's because of the ventilation pipes. Somewhere they have to go. Sometimes we can't resist doing something different than timber. We steel stair, but still with timber steps. And then this attic that requires the whole knowledge of innovative timber structure in order to not unnoticed, in order to achieve unnoticeable renovation. Attic dormers are lined with these the lignotrend aligning. They are very, very, very silent. So it's quite a nice experience. So you can sit there on your own. And then this lively new timber corresponds very well to the existing old traditional beams. It's a library literally for everyone, and we are happy that the young generation has embraced this old building. The young generation sits now somewhere, there already 450 years somebody has built it there. I don't explain the facades in length. It's only done with a lot of care. There again, the difference between the timber window frames, these are the very reconstructed old timber frames, and the new ones that we use steel, they make a very significant difference. The new window and the new opening that we cut ourselves, and the timber frames in an old opening where we did a reconstruction. This is what we found. This is what it was 50 years ago when we had a military use. This is what it has become now. Also an old photograph. And this is what it was when it was opened. So it was a very happy moment when the people all were able to enter the library after so many years of vacation, decay, and renovation. We made a book that is easy to order or to borrow at the library, our library. And now what's only left is the church, and we will build a beautiful natural balcony in there to be able to use that in the future for cultural purposes. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much.